Do you want to know how to shave 5 years off your property investing journey? Hi, I'm Sam Powell, co-host of Property Pals Australia podcast.
And I'm Jaryd Krause, the other co-host, and in this pod, we speak with Jef Miles. He's a multi-million-dollar property portfolio owner, worked over 10 years in the financial services, and as a broker, helped settle over $20 million worth of loans in just 1 year. He's a renovator, property developer. He's also the co-founder of Australia's largest online property investment community, which is Oz Property Investors. They have over 80,000 members in 2022. And Level Up Property recently, which is the blueprint to building your own 150K passive income portfolio. And in this pod, we speak about why it's so hard to become financially free, if maybe impossible, in just under 10 years. There's so much else we talk about as well, Sam.
Yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of wealth in this man's brain and knowledge. He talks about just analysis paralysis. Even himself, it took him 5 years to buy his first investment property, and breaking down that journey. And after what's that now, it's been 15 years, which sounds insane, but he's come out and co-developed the Level Up Property Education course, which is instilling all his knowledge in there. And he's sharing it with the world because, there's those that can do it themselves and those that realise that it's best to outsource to a professional. But either way, we talk about it. We break down, different life journeys as well as, I guess, the challenges he had, becoming a property investor.
Yeah, he's so open to sharing what he's learned, what he's done not so well, what he has done well. What I love talking about is as you go through your property journey, why you should change your team over time and when, and who you should be using, the difference between financial, brokers, not going for just interest rates. We talk about a little bit about areas and all that sort of thing. So much value in this pod. It's not the only way that we can help you for free. Please get our How to Maximize Your Borrowing Capacity mini course at propertypals.au/resources. Enjoy the pod. Welcome to Property Pals, the podcast where we share everything around how to build a property portfolio, from researching areas, financing, structuring, buying, selling, and reinvesting to live a life of financial independence. As a disclaimer, any information shared by myself, Jaryd, Sam, and the Property Pals team is strictly general and should not be taken as constituting professional advice. You should consider seeking independent legal, financial, and taxation advice from a qualified professional.
Jef Miles, welcome to Property Pals Australia. How are you?
Mate, I'm excited. I'm bringing with excitement to share this journey with your audience, because I don't get asked to go on many podcasts, and when I do, I often take a bit while to get back to people. So I'm excited to just chat with some legends of the property, sort of just making stuff happen and having those conversations, those authentic and real conversations. So let's go.
Thanks so much for your time. So let me ask, why did you decide to jump on the pod? We're just, like you said before, we've got some good guests on, but we're not just kicking numbers goals in terms of how big our channel is and stuff yet, and we're pretty underground. But yeah, why did you decide to come on and have a yarn?
I'm just going to say you are the most underrated property YouTube channel at the moment, so definitely subscribe to these guys. Going to be plenty of gems shared. But the reason I wanted to come on is, and I shared this a little bit before the thing, is that I just want to help people to get to where they want to go with their property investing. Now, whether that be course, do it yourself, buyer's agent, I'm fairly a lot of people have their stick. It's you have to use a course, or buyer's agents are the way to go, or do it yourself is the only way. Otherwise, you'll get parted from your money. I'm not too fussy either way, and that's interesting, given somebody's just launched a product. But I've done all of those channels myself. I've done DIY, I've done buyer's agent sort of early in the game. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it again, because there's a time and a place for them, and I've done do it yourself. So I've done the course. So that's why I just want to jump on and hope and know I'll share some value with you guys and just have a genuine conversation. I wish it was over a beer rather than I've got a coffee and a water, but let's work with what we got.
Here we are. Here we
I
are.
literally just created my own Hydrolyte drink for this. We're health freaks.
Well, I'll for those that don't know you, Jeff, I'll do a little intro for you, mate. But if I feel like you're a household name in the Australian property investing space. But,
Absolutely.
I'll do a little pump up because this man is full of knowledge, and really grateful to have you on. And we'll talk about your Level Up Property course that you've just created, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
But mate, correct me if I'm wrong, but multi-million-dollar property portfolio owner. You've done 10 plus years in financial services. You've been a pretty successful broker in the past as well.
Yep.
Obviously the renovation on your projects as an investor, and also going into the development space. But probably the biggest impact I've seen is the Oz Property Investors Facebook page, where you've got over 80,000, mate. I remember being on your podcast and I think I subscribed when you were around like 10,000 or 15,000. That only felt like a year or so ago, mate. So pretty impressive what you're building, and especially this course, Level Up, because everyone's got a course, but there's good, there's bad, and there's rubbish in every side of things in life. I've got to be careful of my swearing, but this one looks like it's a really valuable course you put together. And I mean, you've been podcasting yourself for years now, so you've learnt a lot.
Yeah, I have. So for me, it's like the course is great, but I wanted to come on today and hopefully share a little bit of, I've been investing as well, or thinking about investing, because that's one of the insights I wanted to share. Thinking about investing since 2010. And I didn't buy my first property till 2015, in full transparency. There was a 5-year gap there on an education piece. And that's part of the reason why Level Up sort of wanted to get there. And having conversations with people now, they sort of say, well, I just don't know where to start. I don't know how to buy in the state. And that's fine. And that's where Oz Property Investors and plenty of other great property forums, Property Chat. I don't mind plugging other sort of great platforms, which is owned by Jan Summers and sold it off, Summersoft, which is great. People just need to have that education, have that community around them as well. So where do you want to go from here, guys? Or what do you want to ask me from here?
Yeah, man, I've got so many questions. Like, first, what's the gap between thinking about it in 2010 to acquiring in 2015? Why was that the case, looking back in hindsight?
That's a great question. I was actually writing this out over the last couple of days, and I watched the session you did with Jordan De Jong. And anybody, there's heaps of gold in that session, so make sure you watch that session the guys did with that. And that's where you've got 100K passive income in 10 years. Is it actually achievable? And in that session, he said a dream written down with the date becomes a goal. A goal broken down into steps becomes a plan, and then a plan backed by consistent action becomes reality. So a bit cheesy, a bit cliche, but that really resonated with me. And that sort of said, that talks to why it took me so long to execute. So I had that dream to be a property investor. It was like, it's the mums and dads of Australia. They're all like, oh yeah, the great Australian dream. The thing you talk about, the barbecue, you're like, oh yeah, I'll just go and buy a property and make 300K in 2 years. And it's, I mean, maybe not 20, 30 years ago, that would be ridiculous doing that. But these days, particularly post-COVID, it's happened relatively easy. You just threw a data map and bought it. But 2010, I started off that journey looking for deals, knowledge, and all that jazz. I went to probably close to 100 seminars just on this. So
free ones?
Yeah, most of them free.
Yeah.
And we'll tell more about that story later in the thing. So make sure you stay tuned, because there was a bit of an aha moment. But I went to things like DHA, so Defence Housing Australia. I don't want to sort of say they're good or bad. They're information out there. It's a data point that you can look at or you can not look at. But I went to those guys, and I went to things like some of the blue chip sort of property experts that are still out there. And I was just looking for what sort of matched for me. And I just nothing really resonated with me. And then I looked at the bright, shiny objects as well. I looked at, in 2010, I don't know if you guys how closely you were tracking. I was sort of early 20s, and I was just like, oh yeah, like I wanted to get rich quick kind of thing. And so I went to go and look at where there was mining towns like Karratha and Port Hedlands. And I'm not saying people should buy in these towns, but this was almost, they were getting close to $1 million median house price is out there. And the rents were like $1,500 to $2,000 a week. And I was just like, wow, this is why I'm buying, and like close to 10% yields. And I'm like, this is where I got to invest, right? Like just got to make money. But they didn't
We've
have
got
the
a story
fun.
of a friend that did that.
Yeah, how did that go for them?
I mean, not good.
Sorry,
I'm going to blame the financial planning industry. I was in that space back then, and they were kind of like they had. I remember I worked for one company, and it was like financial planning, and then and go talk to our property people, and they were just like a separate business, but just flogging house and land packages, buying out in mining towns.
It's really scary, isn't it? Because I was also in the industry for 4 years, remediating some of that stuff, and just hearing people that had bought in Whyalla and Gladstone at sort of 2012, 2013, and they just families are decimated. But back to sort of what I was saying there. That sort of I wasn't able to sort of obviously finance that, and I had a mortgage broker who came out and sort of assessed around that 2011, 2012, and he gave me that sort of, oh yeah, you can borrow about this amount, and there was no strategy behind. It was just, okay, you go one of these big four banks. He was one of these mobile guys, came up to my house and said, okay, here's your numbers, here's what you can borrow, with no forethought as to what the plan or the strategy was. So I'll let you guys.
It's very different time, but like in relation to that story of like what you could just get, like they'll just give you your borrowing capacity now with not much like back then, and you don't have a strategy, and then you've got these mining towns that are getting pitched with the ROI, and we all know that didn't work out for so many investors. And then like how do you like now with getting so many buyer's agents, and like we said before you even got on air, like we're not biased towards just use a buyer's agent or buy it yourself, right? Well, I'm slightly biased. Without an education, I don't think it's worth buying yourself until you are educated. But now there's so many, like there's courses teaching people to become buyer's agents so they can make 15 to 20 plus grand a month, buying one property for somebody. What, like, do you see this as like a big thing? Like, what are the risks in all of that? Like now, like, do you see this as being a phase and it's going to get phased out with just so many buyer's agents?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I've thought a bit about it. I hadn't sort of made any notes on it, but I've got thoughts. And look, I mean, we sort of, the other half of Oz Property, Joe is kicking goals with his thing, Property Principles. Not to plug in, but he's doing some great stuff.
We plugged in a couple of weeks before, mate. He's
subscribe to go and have a look at the more tech savvy half of Oz Property. He's the one who makes the tech. I make the operations. But no, so my thoughts are, so you've got a couple of different, you've got the mortgage broking model, which in Australia now, they've pretty much hit 80% saturation of the market versus the bank. So I almost liken that to, you've got buyer's agents. I'm not saying buyer's agents are going to turn to 80% of the market of buying people properties, but there's the DIY, the people who just do that, and then there's the buyer's agents. And you take a look across the shore to what's going on in the US. So pretty much most buyers, or not most, but I don't know the exact numbers, but I know there's a big,
I do.
Oh, you go. Yeah.
87% now.
87 in America or in the US.
Using buyer's agents.
Yep.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so will Australia get to that model? I'm not sure that we will, because I think Australians, although we don't mind paying, I think we're tight asses.
Our mentality, dude. Like I only work with Americans. Well, most, like 90% of my clients are Americans in my other business, and I don't like to work with Australians. No offense, Aussies, because like they're investing money, and we are tight asses, and we're very slow to move. And America, but this is we're so fortunate in Australia because we have so many great resources and so many things that we can. In America, if you're not fighting for money, you're on the streets. Like literally, like you don't get free healthcare, you don't get like government money to put yourself up in a house and housing commission, stuff like that. It's their mentality is so different. This is why Americans, and I've got American friends that are just like so in your face and just go getters, versus Australians. We're just like, we are pretty chill, we are pretty lazy, and it's because we're so lucky, Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm not sure if we're going to be just like, let's just go so hard into only using buyer's agents. 87% is pretty out there.
Yeah, I sort of think there's a place for people that don't have the time, and of course I would say that. But I mean, to me, I've used everything, and I'm not again. I think there's value in that sort of model. And I think if you're going to use any professional, and I think you should be using professionals, of course, whether it be broker, whether it be accountant, if you're going to use those, and this is one of the early things I learned is education is great. Everybody's going to have that agenda, whether it be course provider, whether it be person selling a house and land package. They're going to have, so it's vital to sort of look behind the incentives. So a buyer's agent incentive is probably to do that deal, and that's okay, that's fine. And a person selling a course is to get you to not use a buyer's agent, probably. I mean, I don't know. And the person who's so you just have to figure out, well, what works for you and what you actually want to do. I don't sort of mind either way, but it's just whatever you vibe with and whoever you vibe with as well, because the course market is saturated as well. I've taken sort of really expensive property courses as well, and we'll talk about that. But it's vital you ask those questions. Sorry,
yeah.
Can I double down, mate? This is. I'm wanting to ask some hard-hitting questions, and I'm just like, you know what? Let's just do it.
Do it. Let's go.
What level up? You guys have created that course, and what's your agenda? What's the meaning behind it for you? Talk us about that.
Yeah, so for me, I see, and one of the reasons why we did is because we get so many people reach out to you via direct message in the group, and I felt it was hard to just keep helping those people, because you think one person asks, okay, here's my budget, where do I buy? And then it turns, and I'm like, it's very hard to give you that succinct answer. That's the age old, okay, what's the next free boom locations? So I don't know whether we'll talk to those free boom locations in this pod, but maybe we might. But no, so everybody asks that question, where do I buy? Here's my budget. And then it's like, okay, I need to unpack a couple of questions before you even start to get to that conversation. It's like, what do you looks like? But the course, and then it's like, how much time can I didn't feel we were serving those people as best as we could. If they didn't want to go down the buyer's agent route, then they had the option of piecing together it themselves. So Joe and myself, been investing for over 10 years. We've been sort of doing Oz property for over 5 years now. Joe's been buying hundreds of deals for clients himself. So we've got those sort of the things that work and the things that people trip up on. And I think a lot of people struggle with the confidence. It's not that they don't know what they should be doing. It's that they almost need somebody to say, okay, here's the steps and here's the process. And no process is 100% perfect. But the agenda really is to get 500 people at least financially free in the next 10 years. That's a big claim, I know. That's huge. And it makes you feel uncomfortable saying that on a podcast, on a session. Because what does that even mean? Like, what is financially free? Like, we could just go down so many rabbit holes.
It means different things to different people.
Exactly.
And I spot on agree with you, is that it's the confidence thing is huge. And how can you expect somebody to be confident when they've never done something before? Confident I'm going to achieve that result. And then you also slap this price tag, which is typically the biggest acquisition or purchase that most people are going to make. So then there's emotions driven by that. So it's just such a tricky acquisition and investment for people to make. And to have confidence is, even after doing courses and stuff like that, I've done property courses and didn't purchase a business myself, and read so many books and all that sort of stuff. And, I know that you want to bridge that gap, right? Because that's the main reason for you is have somebody complete the course and be confident.
And isn't it they say, and I shouldn't be saying these numbers about, but I'm okay with saying these numbers. Isn't it they say that only about 10 to 20% of people, or roughly thereabouts, complete courses? Like, I don't know. Do you know those numbers, Sam? Or
I know. I know.
ChatGPT, that stuff. Yeah.
There's definitely a very low percentage, and that actually complete the course. But then I think what you're building to with the group is very common, because I have the same conversations with people, and not that it annoys me, but it's just like there's not enough time in the day to answer the same question to a different person.
This is why we do the pod. I had all these questions for Sam when I first started, and I was like, hang on, can we just record this for our friends, because our friends are asking this, and then it's just spalled into this. And I want to dig into the juicy stuff of you talked about Jordan before and the 10-year plan and being financially free with 100K passive income in 10 years. Yeah. And Jordan is amazing. And that is a great podcast episode. So I'm glad you plugged that one, Jef. But you've also got I want to bring up why you believe you won't be financially free in 10 years. What's your thought process? Like we were exchanging emails, and you wanted to talk about like why it's hard to become financially free in 10 years through property investing. What are the things that, why do you say that? What are the things that are holding you back? Or am I misreading what you spoke about?
No, 100%. I think so. We had the podcast, our Oz Property one, on it's like how to be financially free in 10 years. And I think so. I'm sort of going reverse engineering the challenges that people face to get there, and the big challenge, like as I just said, and I'll touch on more my personal story and say the reason why it took me that 5 years is because I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's why it's hard to become financially free, and whether it be 10 years, whether it be 5 years, whether it be 30 years, because life gets in the way. So you don't know the steps you need to take, and you sort of like, who do you guys both mentioned it. It's like this is your biggest financial decision, so you don't know the questions to ask people. You don't know who to trust because everybody's like, buy my products, buy my buyer's agent, join my group. And it's the market is so noisy. But the reason why people don't, the reason why it took me to buy that, because so I sort of got past that bright, shiny objects phase in 2011 of buying in mining towns, partially because I wasn't going to be able to buy there anyway with the budgets that were there. And I'm really super glad I couldn't, because it would have been disastrous at that time of the cycle. But I didn't even know that market was just, there was no fundamentals underpinning it. So I said, okay, cool. I made one of the next biggest mistakes investors make. They buy within 5 to 10, and this is why people aren't getting that financially free in 10 years. They sort of say, okay, I'll go and buy the next hotspot or wherever it is. And if they don't do that, they'll buy within 10 to 15 kilometers of where they live. They'll buy their backyard. So they're like, oh, well, I know St. Mary's, and that's where I grew up. I know Sydney quite well. So I started going, and then I made another cardinal sin as well. I started taking my mum to open homes. That's really kind of, I'm a bit of a mummy's boy. I'm okay with admitting that.
But we are too.
Yeah. But yeah, so, and mum, I love mum, and she's done okay financially, but these are the kind of role models that I had in my life. The people that weren't actually, they bought their own houses, but they didn't invest. So I didn't get that community. Didn't have an Oz Property. I didn't have a Steve Ignite and Steve did come into the journey at some stage. But yeah, so I started going to open homes, and mum said, oh, okay, like, because my borrowing capacity was probably about 350, 400 at that time, because I was sort of just starting out. And she said, but I think you should sort of target that 200 to 250 mark. And so at that stage in the area we're in, this is the start of the Sydney boom in 2012. So I said, okay, I can buy a unit 5 to 10 minutes. So, and that's where, and as a result of that, I didn't end up buying it because I thought, I don't know if this unit's going to be the best place to buy. I didn't have that savvy broker. I didn't have that community around me. So those are the kind of things, those are some of the reasons. The other reasons that people struggle with is that they don't have that key strategy piece. They don't know the tools. They don't have the data. They don't have all that sort of side of things to do. And we'll unpack. We call it the ultimate wealth goal. So they don't have, if you want to do it in 15 years or 10 years, what does that number look like? That's another key question that people need to ask. If it's 150K, you're probably not going to do that through buy and hold type of properties.
And what are you starting with? And then how do you acquire more debt with the income that you have or don't have, so that's a big factor as a starting point. And then also throughout the phase of like, yes, you got your property growth, but you've also got what are you injecting into your strategy from your own personal income.
I think I love these chats, mate. This is great. Like, we're talking about it, and it just reminds me, like, we're all just learning along the way, right? Like, and it's,
I'll put my hand up for that as well. Yeah.
We're at this stage where, you become comfortable. Like, my biggest advice to people is take the plunge and do something. But analysis paralysis is so real. I think at the very least you should be doing, the Level Up course or other, there's quality courses out there. Trust me, it takes years to actually figure out who in this Australian property industry is actually, morally sound.
It's so crazy, man.
Yeah. That's what we're trying to bring into our sort of realm. But once you do that first deal, then you realize, like Jaryd, you kind of get a little bit bored, don't you, mate? You're like, oh, well, that's done. And then you start thinking, oh, what else can I do? Then you're looking for those renovators and then those subdivision sites. And like, it's a progression. who knows where we end up? I mean, I see what you've achieved, and with Jef, and even with some of those purchases that you and Joe made in your joint portfolio, they're bangers.
For the record, I don't 100% agree with all of the purchases. I mean, and Joe and I go back and forth on that a little bit. There is, and that's a healthy discourse. But
what purchases were not great, and why? And also, a follow-up question of that is like, what Sam was alluding to is like, you can get bored and then you switch the strategy up. Has that been beneficial for you or not? So firstly, what are the acquisitions or the purchases you've made that like maybe that wasn't the best thing?
Yeah. No, so there was and I saw Sam grimace a little bit there. And that's fine. I'm happy to and Joe, it's that unit block that was purchased in Geelong, and I think it is a great asset. I love it. It's fantastic. I feel it was just probably a little bit. The reason why it's there is because it was just a great purchase price. But is it then going to? And it has the value add opportunity down the track. So it is a great. I would probably have picked that up more in the consolidation stage. So you've got the accumulation stage where you sort of grow those. You have those growth assets. Those assets that are going to deliver the capital growth, but cash flow wise, they're probably not going to be great. And you've got the consolidation where you start to transition. And Jordan talks about this, and a lot of people talk about it. So it's not unique to. I'm not giving anybody anything new, but you start to transition across to that more cash flow play. Maybe you're at a granny flat. Maybe you do a subdivision to reduce some of that debt, to then transition into the cash flow stage, which is. And if your time frame's 15 years, and maybe you start doing it around year 10 or year 11, based on, so we've got the Ultimate Wealth Goal Tracker, Jordan's got game plans, all those. There are some really snazzy tools out there to do that. But that's the one that I thought, that's probably a little bit early in the piece, but it'll serve it. The reason why it was needed is because to actually balance, because it's probably about 50 or 60K negative cash flow based on how quickly all those assets have been acquired. So that one serves its purpose, but that was probably the one I was most on the fence about. Whereas the other ones, I'm like, yep, they're all pretty good. And I'm there's one that we're debating, and Joe doesn't like this location at all, and I'm like, it's a little bit mining. I mean, it's not a mining town, but it's a bit mining town-esque.
Are you buying together, or are you looking at getting? Yeah, okay.
So it's a unit trust kind of situation. So it's essentially, it is a joint venture, and I wouldn't suggest that for most people, because there's trials and tribulations. I wouldn't do it with most people. I've been in business with Joe with Oz Property for that time. So having that trust, and I've done other joint ventures with people as well. So I've done a lot of, and I've seen it go really badly with people I know quite well, and I've done ones where people just said, we don't even need to write it down. I'm like, no, we have to write down at the very least, get it in an email, get those core points down. And this is before it, yeah. But so, yeah, that's the way we've structured it. And we have that then behind the scene. Helps us with borrowing capacity as well, side of things, if we decide to want to buy that big PPOR as well.
I think your unit block was good, mate. I think all the acquisitions are pretty good. Maybe 2-bed, 1
bit
bath
of controversy.
Like
Joe won't watch this anyway, so I'll send it to him and I'll say watch half an hour, but that's okay. He's used to me saying this stuff anyway.
Yeah. But the going back to sort of like what I was centering in is like, there's no perfect property, and even for the professionals that do it every single day, you still know that you got to take that step, and you'll always look back in hindsight and be like, I coulda, shoulda, woulda, but if you do that, that's where you get stuck in that 5 years of doing nothing and miss out on capital growth.
I know.
But I also want to double down on Jaryd. Let's say part 2 of that question was really good, mate. Let's go there.
Oh, what was the part of the question? Sorry, the first part wasn't great, but what
was it, Sam?
I guess the lessons that you've learned along the way in building your portfolio, and how would you do it any differently from what you've done today?
So first one is 100%. If somebody's not executing, whether that be their course, or just actually figure out what it is that's stopping you. Is it because, and that's the thing I've learned along the way, and to not be afraid of spending money on education, or if you have that money. If you don't have that money, so the first thing I would have done is because I probably was able to save up 40 to 50K, and I had that there sitting there. So, but instead I kept sort of going around. I was getting rich through through inaction. Like I was dreaming. I was doing it because I felt that I was, so I would have just actually said, okay, look, stop going to the seminars, just pick a course of action, do some data, do some parameters, and there's probably sort of 8 metrics that really matter. The metrics that matter, Joe talks about, like, and some people have their 30. So those are the things I've learned as well, and making sure that you're not afraid to move on from professional, because I've probably gone through about 5 to 10 brokers, and I struggled with actually sort of, because I'm pretty loyal to most, but making sure that if you outgrow that person, it's not about them. It's just they have their niche, and not being afraid to make mistakes. Like my first property purchase, to go back to that, is I purchased via VA up in Brisbane, in north of Brisbane in 2015, mid 2015, and we bought that for 334, sorry. And at that time, so I could, like you say about the don't be analysis paralysis, like the mistakes you could have made. And it was a townhouse. So you say, well, I didn't even know, like I went to the buyer's agent with it, and not to smash buyer's agent. This is a lifetime ago. This is 10 years ago, people. So didn't have, I feel too young to be saying that. But I went to the buyer's agent and I said, I want something with a bit of capital growth and a bit of cash flow. That was I didn't even know. And they secured me that. They secured me the townhouse, but I didn't even know what to look at when it comes to capital growth. And so I was lumped with that asset, which we purchased from that other person who bought it in 2009 for 360. So it had gone backwards in that 5-6 years. And then
I just wanted to say I totally agree with you. Like what you mentioned about moving on from people is brilliant, because if you don't move on, you can stay in the same lane, and it can keep you there. And I think about, like, when I'm coaching people, is like, if you want a premium life, you need premium relationships, and you need premium people that are professionals to help you get the premium results. And what gets you from A to B is not typically the same thing as they're going to get you from B to C. You will need to switch up your team and change it as you go. So as you've evolved, how has your team changed? I know that you started out yourself, you did the education, you self-purchased. But how has your team evolved throughout, building your property portfolio? Like what did it look like at the start, and then how has it evolved?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that one. So for me, because we talk about the A property team, so for me it was the typical, your accountant, your broker, and your ancillary team, which is your solicitor or your conveyancer, which is only when you're purchasing a property. But what it looked like at the start, it was not to disparage any sort of company, because but there was the Aussie broker who came out to you and just had that sort of product, and that was great. It for some people that can work fantastic, but then it's asking that question of that broker. Like, to me, the broker is probably the key person in your team. And I was one myself for a year, and the conversations you're having with people, they come to you and they just say, they focus so much on rate. It's like the team. And when I first started investing, that was my focus as well. It's like, what is the best rate? And that's the type of question that's going to get you stuck. Investing on that's going to lead you in the 90% or 80-90% of people that get stuck on 1 to 2 properties, because they're like, oh well, I want to go to the bank with, I don't want to go to your third tier lenders, which are third tier lenders such as your Liberty. So that's the kind of, so that's what I start off with, and then I sort of move. Sorry, again.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, the reason you can get stuck if you just focused on rate is that, it's not. What can be more beneficial is that having a high growth property that can acquire you maybe more debt. It's about access to capital. It's not so much about the rate, right?
Yeah, and then even sort of once you start to get to that 1 to 2 to 3 properties, like having those more, and your accountant as well. And I've only ever had one accountant, and that's Jeremy. You guys I'm pretty sure I had Jeremy on. If you haven't, you have to have him on. But no, then the reason why I've been able to stick with that, because he's grown as well. He's got that $20 million plus property portfolio. So he hasn't stood still. And those I learn something every conversation I have with Jeremy, because he's constantly, if you've got somebody in your corner who's showing that they're helping their clients to do what you want to do. Whereas if you got somebody who's just like, oh yeah, and that's one of the core questions I want to ask any professionals, like most professionals, those core people. It's like, how are you helping your clients, or what are you doing for yourself? And they may not be doing it necessarily like big 10, 20 property investors themselves, and that's okay. But if they can get you there, if they've shown that they can do it for those people similar to you, then happy days. You don't necessarily need, but they need to have some sort of idea and then be able to be doing it actively for people as well. That's how it's changed.
That's a great question to ask them, is like, how do you, how have you done it yourself, and then how are you helping others? So you're thinking like 2 properties ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Because life's going to get in the way. Like, you're going to have kids, you're going to change jobs. You might sort of get injured. And I mean, I've been injured in the last, I haven't been able to run, but some people have, because I've had a calf strain, but some people get really serious injuries, and it impacts the way they earn money. So life's going to change and get in the way. And it's in the financing strategies. So it's what tools can your team help you to use to make sure, so have those really frank really sort of ask those pointed questions of, even if you're using a buyer's agent, it's like, okay, great. Like, you're recommending me buy in Melbourne now. Why are we buying in Melbourne? Are we buying in Melbourne because every buyer's agent and investor is talking about the 5 suburbs in Melbourne that are going to boom? Is that why you're buying there? You're just following the herd. And if you are, that's okay. But let's have a really, they might bristle, some buyer's agents or even course people, they'll bristle at that. But I think if you need to sort of be, if they're okay, if they're confident in what they're doing, then they'll be like, yeah, here's the 5 or 6 reasons why we're doing it. The data looks good, and yeah.
There's a good point I want to double down on, mate. Your lessons in life, and I know you used to be pretty strong in the location research back in the day.
Yeah.
Can you share with the investors sort of your level of hierarchy? Because a lot of people jump to the property as the focus point. What have you learned along the way? And
amazing question, Sam. Like, what do you hold in most importance when you're acquiring? That's so good.
Yeah. So for me, the way I take a step back, and I usually start with a conversation with my broker. And maybe that's because I'm a little bit biased and I was a broker. So and Joe says it all the time. It's like, like we're talking finance again. And it's like, well, because property is a game of bricks, with property game money with bricks thrown in, and everybody says that. So I've just cliches left, right, and center here. But no, so I go to the broker, and it's what we call the sort of property plan, and and that's kind of the game plan. So, but no, so it's very different but it's like, what do I need next to purchase? Do I need a capital growth property, or do I need, and this is before you're even looking at the area. So start high level macro. So what do I need next? So I need cash flow. What does my portfolio need next to make sure I'm not tapping myself out? And of course, that's never going to guarantee that you're going to keep moving forward. It's about probability and putting those steps in place. And sometimes those dominoes will fall over before you knock them over. They'll fall over without that. But that's what I do. Have that conversation and say, what does this next property need to look like? 1 to 2. And then I go, okay, great. Now I'm going on the hunt. Do I need? If I need capital growth in the short term, then my brief sort of looks like, okay, I'm going to look at metrics that are really, I'm probably going to purchase in a warmer market, as in, and Matty is sort of from HTAG, we learn a little bit from that. He talks about warmer markets. And Joe's got the 80-20 as well. We've got the 80-20. But it's those things like your days on market, your stock on market, like your vacancy rates, all these sort of metrics to look at and say, okay, great, that's trending down. That looks really good. That I'm going to shortlist that area. And days on market, all that sort of stuff. And then it's also building approvals, all that sort of thing. So you're building that into your brief and saying, okay, and what your budget is as well, because there's no point looking at Frankston, for example, maybe Frankston North, if you've got a 500K, 600K budget. I'm not saying you shouldn't buy there, but it's just one that's top of mind. But Frankston or Seaford, you're sort of down in Victoria. You're going to need probably 700,000 to 900,000 to buy in one of those areas. Maybe a little bit more, give or take, depending on how close you are. And if your budget is 500, then you just have to take that off your plate straight away. So it's kind of because otherwise you're going to be looking at 1,000 suburbs in Australia, and you're going to do what I did and wait 5 years to start your journey. And that's when you start to, once you'll probably come up with between 3 and 5 suburbs, most people, depending on your budget. And if you've got 7 to, you need to figure out what that strategy looks like. And then you start to go to, well, okay, now I'm going to start having those. If you're not going to fly there yourself, I typically like to go and fly to these areas these days, but appreciate people don't have the time. Boots on the ground. You have this conversation with the property managers, and that's where you start looking more at the properties and having those conversations with agents and property managers. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and you basically, I guess what I'm leaning to is like you start from your macro with your budget, your cash flow parameters, and what you're trying to choose, and then you go down into the more micro suburb level data within that local government area, and then even further, you go into, all right, well, there's pockets within suburbs that are sort of outperforming, and I guess that's those conversations with the property managers that help you identify and the boots on the ground driving around. So like what people are I'm trying to help people understand is like there's an analogy that I made it up, so it's probably rubbish, but it's like good fishermen don't go to just any lake and just throw a line out. They're going in and going, all right, I'm going to look for this fish at this time with this bait, and they're going and they're patiently waiting. I think that's where most property investors tend to go a little bit wrong, is they don't know what they're fishing for, and then it's a very expensive asset class to unravel.
100%. I mean, and that's what sort of hamstrung with my first property, because it did see considerable growth. But it's like everybody's talking about Brisbane from sort of 2013, 2014 onwards. Every buyer, not every, but a lot of buyers agents and people were buying up there waiting for it to just grow. And it took that sort of 4 to 5 years to start to grow. And maybe it was sort of COVID. And you can never perfectly time. And there's people that say time in the market versus timing the market. I think, where are you guys? I'll ask you, I'll turn the mic on you guys a little bit. What do you guys think about that?
I've got something to say to that.
Yeah.
It depends on your outlook and your strategy.
Yep.
But time in the market and compounding is so damn valuable.
Yep.
But with the data that we have now, you can have both. So why not take both, right? Like you can try and time the market. And also we're starting to talk about like, how long do you hold a property for now versus just buy it and hold it forever, which has been the age-old strategy. But now we're starting to talk about how long does that area have before your opportunity cost of staying in that area too long is not as good as cashing out or just rolling that money over into a different acquisition. So I think you can have both. What's your take, Sam?
Come on, mate. We've been doing this for nearly 2 years now. You know my standpoint.
a bit longer. You're a value, man. So
yeah.
Oh, like the podcast, like Jaryd and I are best mates, and like one thing, he moved away into a different country to. So this is a great way for us to just maintain our passions and our relationships, but sort of double down on that one. But my viewpoint is, the only constant in the world is change, right? And the property market is evolving, and it will continue to evolve. I do have concerns around buyers agents and inflating, like not inflating markets, just more volatility in that. But that is leaning towards advancements in data. Like we've got demographers, we've got data scientists, you've got all these professionals backing it. If you want to be more active, it's kind of like. Nothing's changed in the investing space. Like you could be a buy and hold share trader, and you do quite well. If you want to outperform, then it needs a little bit more of your time, and that's where it goes to property, where like you can do those more like buy and hold for medium term plays, and you can outperform the market. It's going to cost you more time, and you're going to take a little bit more risk if that's within your appetite. You're going to accelerate your strategy faster, but that once again isn't for everybody.
I think it's a younger person's sort of strategy, right? Is like when you're younger, you're just hungry. Like I need this money yesterday, and like I'll work for it. Versus as your property portfolio and you age, and you're like, like I could make more money, but do I need to?
Yeah,
I think it's different age.
It even gets and I'll sort of share what happened next after that property purchase, because I was a little bit disillusioned, because you see all these people making money in property, and you're like, you see the success stories, and you're like, why wasn't I one of those success stories? Why didn't I make 30% in my first 12 months? And you're just like. You felt, because these are the conversations that people probably aren't having, and it's why a lot of people aren't financially free in 10 years or even 15 or 20 years, because they just get caught and then they don't. And you can't guarantee you're going to pick an area. But I didn't actually outline what my strategy was. I just said, yeah, I might want to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But yeah, it's the age old, or when is enough enough? Like if somebody gets to 150K or 100K passive income, and Joe was telling us, we had a chat with Aaron Chrissy David today about this. He's on the podcast next, and he said, well, when is enough enough? And I'm kind of like, well, yeah, like when you're actually satisfied and just put a peg in the stake, and if it grows further, otherwise you're never going to be happy. Like you kind of have to be happy with what you've got, and then once you sort of keep going on, and it's easy for somebody in my position to say, with somebody out there hungry, but going off on a bit of a tangent. Sorry, boys.
No, mate. Philosophical things is what the Property Pals Australia podcast is about, because it's
absolutely
it's the psychology of money and investing too that people. You know, Jaryd taught me a big thing, and I don't know if you've created it yourself, but you know, I feel like I've heard it before around the track since you told me. But you know, people they underestimate what they can do in the long term and overestimate what they can do in the short term.
Yeah, we typically overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what we can achieve in 3 years. And if you slap a zero on the end of that, wow, it's profound. And you know, I think, coming back to two of your points, is that when is enough enough? I don't know that our mind can understand when enough is enough or predict when enough is enough properties. Yeah. I think it's a feeling that each of us has. It's like, I'm good. And you start to become more, I would say, at peace, which brings like settled, you know, a feeling of settled versus like running and chasing and trying to do that. But that's when you move from chasing to attraction mode. And then to the other piece is that like the expectation, you know, like you said, like why did I fail? Why did I not get a 30% return on my investment? Why did I not do a Steve McKnight and buy 100 properties in the X period of time? It's like people that listen to these case studies and these success stories is like it's the cream of the crop. It's like the best stories get shared, right? And they do that because they inspire you. But there's so many failures behind all of that as well. And when we set the bar too high, we feel like a failure. But like, fuck, Jef, if you bought a property and you got a 10% growth rate for your first property, that's phenomenal. Like that's still good. And people think, nah, I failed. Like, come on, like let's get real here. Like, let's, you know, just Google the average rate of growth of property in Australia, or Chat GPT or whatever it is.
5 to 6%.
Yes, COVID was a ridiculous time, but like if you're getting that growth, like don't be so hard on yourself, you know. And that's why people think they've failed. And you're like, you bought 2 properties and like maybe you feel like you failed, but in 5 years you're going to feel like a lord.
Yeah. And it's in taking those lessons that you learn. Like from my first property, I learned and that's like, I wish I'd have sort of just like, so Steve Polizzi, another probably friend of you guys, hopefully, maybe not, but he was looking in Sydney in 2012, 2013, around the same time, and he bought in Blacktown. And his portfolio, he'd now moved into being that commercial buyer's agent. But he was a take in action kind of guy, whereas I'm not. So I'm probably a couple of million, maybe give or take a couple of million, because he's probably got a bigger business than us. But yeah, no, not. And you play that comparison game as well. That's where people get trapped, and we get it on our podcast as well. People are like, you guys are kidding me, right? You just bought that. And I have to, like, Joe doesn't like doing it, but I like to. I just say, look, whether you're earning 50 or 150K income at the moment, a 50K might be a bit hard. So you might need to sort of, there are ways you can increase your income. And I know that's a little bit, maybe a little bit on the nose, a little bit controversial. It's like, well, just earn more money. Like that's not always the answer. Like maybe the time is you just need to put the steps in place, because it's a mindset sort of potentially thing as well. I'm not saying that not earning more money is a mindset thing, but there are ways that, just take whatever steps that are appropriate for your stage of life and your level of income. And whether you're earning 500K or 50K, just see what other people are doing and figure out what works. Apply what works for you based on what that person's done.
There's 3 things that I always talk about in a hierarchy of life: is health first, then relationships, then wealth. So like people get caught up, especially males seem to be the most dominant in that way. It's like money, money, money. I've seen a lot of people with a lot of money, on their deathbeds, or to a point where their health is costing them a lot of money because they didn't, put energy into that. There's my little 2 cents. I did want to come back to this townhouse that you bought in Brizzy. Your first purchase. How did it perform? Because a lot of people do I only want to buy houses, but I'm on the fact that if you get it right, you still get good growth out of good assets.
Yeah. So if you bought that same asset that I bought, so between about 2015 and 2019, it actually went probably backwards to about 310, 320 ish. And then
interesting.
I've seen people purchase assets in and around comparable sales, and that's how you sort of you can get a valuation done, which is what the bank cares about really, and what's probably most important. But if you're looking to sell, you look around and see what's comparable sales. And I've seen stuff that's sold for 600, 620, 650, depending on the type of finish and if it's got that second bathroom, all that sort of jazz. But yeah, so it's if you bought in 2021, and to go back to the time in versus time in the market, and not to say you should try and time townhouses, because it's harder, because you are literally relying on the asset. You don't. I'm a massive value add, and we could have a whole podcast on value add, because I've done renovation, I've done development, and that was what my second property, because I couldn't. I had to add value for the second one, because I didn't have that equity. So I thought, well, what can I do? Because I bought the second one in 2016 anyway. So I just said, okay, look, I could sort of, But so it's done, and rents, initially it rented at $360 a week back in 2015, because it was pretty new. And I actually had my first property, and this is I haven't had too many tenants to trash the place outside of, but my first tenant, so first property I bought, and he moved in. For second day, he's like, I can't live here. I'm going to move out. I was like, I don't feel comfortable. He just said there's some shady people hanging around. It's just not my vibe. So he moved out, and then it took us another 3 or 4 weeks to find, and of course he was like, I have to pay freight costs and all that stuff. But it was just like, what the heck? I've just bought this property, and this is my first, and a lot of people would be scared away from that, be like, what have I done? What mistake have I made? This tenant, now I've got a property that's vacant. But yeah, so it's done really well, and I would be a little bit wary of buying that type of asset right now, because you sort of start to see, if you're paying 500 to 600 for that price in Brisbane, you can easily buy a house for another 100. The reason why that asset class did really well is because you saw the houses take off.
Yeah, the demand that came in for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So and you can sort of see the tea leaves in that market. You can sort of see, okay, houses have become 200-300K, and it's not necessarily always going to play out, but most of the times it will, because people will just say, well, if I want to move into a house, I can't afford 800,000. I can buy a townhouse for 400. What am I buying? What can I afford to buy?
Yeah,
that's a good point.
When it comes to capital growth versus cash flow, Jef, where people ask you so many questions, you've definitely got an influence, one of the biggest influences in the space in Australia.
Jeez.
And how do you answer that for people? Should I continue buying for cash, or should I, when do I switch over to cash flow? Versus capital growth, just keep buying 300 to 500K properties in regional areas and just keep going. How do you answer that?
Well, first off, I'd probably say you're speaking to the right Jef, but no. Just because, I mean, people ask that question. So to answer it in terms of cash flow versus capital growth, if you can, and it comes down to, I've mentioned the broker a couple of times, it's, well, what can your budget sustain? Because obviously with the Oz property portfolio, there's good income supporting and good cash injection being put into that. It was, I think Joe said, it was disclosed, it was 500 sort of put into that. So there was obviously many years sort of building that war chest up. So it comes down to, well, if you're only on sort of 80 to 100K, you probably can't, particularly interest rates in March or whenever it goes live of 2025, still at that sort of, if you're on so interest rates are somewhere between that 5 and 6%. So you're going to need to say, okay, if I'm earning 150K and my expenses aren't too crazy, I can probably particularly if you're at the start, you want to build that foundation. We call it the foundational builder properties. So that's where you're focusing on the growth. And then it comes down to, well, if you want to do it in 20 years, you can probably then sort of go a little bit more balanced. But if you want to do it in 10 to 15, you're going to have to see growth pretty quickly in that asset, which means that you might need to sacrifice on the cash flow. And yeah, it depends on the location as well, because places like Townsville, for example, I know Townsville's like the hotspot but there's still decent cash flow there, but you're probably looking at a yield of between 5 and 5.5%. But it's the Townsville tax, you're probably looking at closer to 4.5 to 5%. And if you're buying in Melbourne or Victoria, you've got that nasty land tax everybody talks about, which is not as bad as what people say, but yes, it is a cost. And you've got tenant situations. So I would focus mostly on growth initially, depending on, speak to, not financial advice, speak to your broker, speak to your accountant based on your tax situation as well. Because yes, you have negative gearing, but negative gearing is an outcome. You should never invest based on negative gearing to lose money. Ultimately, you want to retire. And then I start to say, if your goal is 10 to 15 years or 20 years, let's just say it's 20 years, you start to then want to transition to that consolidation phase, depending on what your assets do, because it's all case by case. But you want to start transitioning based on what I've seen, probably around sort of halfway through that journey. So you can sort of start to see, depending on what your portfolio has done, because you're still going to be acquiring assets, but it's because your assets you built initially, bought in year 1, year 2, whatever it is, they'll probably, their cash flow on those, the rents might not going to go up. If you bought well and focused on capital growth, the rents aren't going to have them to risen as quickly as those other assets, so you can buy. So your cash flow is not going to be probably as good on those ones. But it comes down to market timing as well. But I would say start to focus halfway through your goal. And then you can sort of say, okay, great. You can start to release some of that equity if you want to do a subdivision to improve the cash flow. Consider those granny flats, and then at around getting closer, maybe you start to chuck in a commercial if you're comfortable with that asset, or your unit blocks like your ones in Geelong. So does that answer the question? Or
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it also, like, people's lives change, like you said earlier in the podcast, and you'll have your strategy will change a little bit as you age and different things.
And the other thing is, if you're having kids and you just say, if you see some great growth in a property and you've got $500,000 to $1 million in equity and you've got 3 or 4 properties, look, maybe you want to spend some time with the kids, go back to part-time. And if maybe I'm not saying you should or shouldn't sell a property, but if you want to spend some time with, because once they grow up too quick, and you've got a 4 and a 2-year-old now, and you've got I know Sammy's got a couple of kids, and and if you want to spend that time, maybe it's you take the foot off the gas a little bit and you push that out from 15 years to 20 years. But you get that time with the family that you're not going to get back once they go to primary school. I don't know it, but they're probably going to be down the street with John or Julie, and you're like, well, who's dad or who's mum? Like, people have just
Good points, mate. Good points. So there's a big movement too into like having that like midlife retirement where you go and live that. Like for me too, I'm definitely thinking about it, because I'm like, I'm happy to work till I'm 80, 90, like as long as my mind's active. Because what's this big rush to go and retire early, especially if you don't enjoy what you do. But that's another story. What I was thinking about just quickly while you're talking was obviously you've built the portfolio out, you've done quite well, and then the townhouse too. Like, that's a really good lesson in that you took action. It didn't work the way you went, but the initial thesis was for a long-term investment play back in the day.
It was.
So similar sort of comments are coming around the Geelong market at the moment, like where people, they bought back in sort of 2019, 2020 into Geelong, and all the fundamentals were there. But then there was that, this is like an investing principle too around diversification. Like, there was the unknown of what the state government would do during that lockdown period, and then the land tax came on. The fundamentals are still there, and that's why the market is still like on the nose for a lot of buyers agents at the moment for growth. So like, don't get disheartened. There's kind of the message out there around your investment didn't perform the way you initially intended, because if you're looking at that long-term play, you're going to get that growth in the next few years coming forward, which you did with your townhouse is a great example.
Yeah.
But I would preface that to say there's some cool data out there at the moment to try and reduce that risk now. But it is investing, and there is risk. Like you could buy into the biggest hotspot or warm spot to be hotspot location, have all the fundamentals behind you, but there could be a black swan event or something like that.
Could be a cyclone.
Exactly.
Yeah, that one too. And I know we've been going around and so many questions. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I want to get you back on, to be honest, but I'm mindful of everyone's time coming up to the hour. But Jaryd, what questions do you have for Jef that maybe we haven't covered yet, just quickly?
Well, what would be the two biggest things that you've learnt from being a finance broker?
So finance broker for me, so as a broker, one of the things that I learned is you really need to be deliberate in your planning. If you're going to a broker and they're telling you, okay, we're going to get you the best rate, that is a major red flag for me. And we even had a guest on a couple of weeks ago. They said that one of their brokers, they just told them what their borrowing capacity was about the strategy. So they're the probably two biggest things. It's like somebody who's done what you're looking to do, help people. And I was when I was a broker, I was speaking to people with many millions of dollars in their property portfolio. And they just think very differently. They ask the question, well, it's not, what can I borrow? It's like, how can I borrow? Here's what I want to do. How can I do it? And that's kind of getting to and it's if that answer is need to sell one or two properties, then there's a crossroads. It's like, okay, otherwise, if I don't want to sell one of those two properties, what do I need to do in my own work situation or business situation to not sell those properties?
I love that.
So
the reason I love it is because you've got to put yourself first and think about what's my actual goal, and then how do I reverse engineer that into a strategy, and can this finance broker help me achieve that? Or are they just like, let's get you a rate that with ANZ where I get paid good bucks for the commission versus like a different third tier lender that's similar rate, but you
just
get more money.
For the sake of the mortgage brokers out there to do doing a bit of a handball, the broker commissions, whether they go with ANZ or whether they go, I don't know if you guys know this, whether they go with somebody like a Bluestone, the money that a broker gets for writing a loan somewhere is probably the difference, unless they're writing like $4 million. If it's a 500K, 600K, you're probably talking maybe $1 or $2 grand. And yes, it's a little bit of money. But because I had that thing so often. It's like, how do I know that you're not sending me to this lender that's going to charge me an extra 2% because you want to get a bigger commission? And I'd say to that person, I was like, I do get a bigger commission. It should be disclosed anyway in all the documentation. But you'd sort of say, okay, well, we're going here, but here's the reason why. This is a situational lender. We can your situation now. You've got 4 properties. You've got 5 properties. You're going to get 100K with CBA. So we can try and get that loan. I can submit that loan to CBA. At the same time, you're not going to get the amount you need to buy that next property, or they don't have that trust sort of appetite, that trust lending criteria where they're comfortable lending to that thing, or they don't have that self-employed. So that's kind of the way I think about finance strategy.
Nuggets of gold, mate. I definitely want to get you back on. And while we're there, Level Up, the course is now released. There's a lot of hype coming through. Where can we send listeners to learn a little bit more and subscribe?
Probably the best spot is levelup.com.au. So have a look there, and you've got a snazzy jazzy sales page that Joe put together, tells you, and we got a video of us as well, and but also Oz Property Investors as well. Like I don't, whether you come to Oz Property for the free education, and we've been doing it for 5 years, and we'll keep doing it. We're here to keep serving people as best we can, and reach out to me by Facebook as well if you want. I can't guarantee. I'll do my best to get back to you. Happy to sort of help as many people as we can. And if I see trends coming through in messages, that's where we start to generate our content from for the pain points that people are having. Level Up is levelup.com.au, and that's probably the best spot to check that out. Book a discovery call, and we'll have that conversation to see if there's a fit. Because being a former broker, you can I can't tell people they can definitely borrow, but I can ask those sort of more targeted questions. So Joe and I are having those conversations with people at the moment. And then Joe, we both have our own strengths, and that's where we combine quite well. Joe's probably the stronger negotiator. I'm a good negotiator. Joe's fantastic. He wheels and deals like no tomorrow. So, but yeah, and that's why we combine quite well. Whereas he snoozes a little bit with the finance. I'm like, I could stay up talking to you at 3 a.m. with finance, but maybe
great teamwork. Love that.
Teamwork make the dream work, guys.
It
but
does.
No, thank you for all the building you guys are doing as well. And I know that you're going to absolutely, whatever you guys want to achieve with your property investing channel, I know you're going to get there. It's going to happen.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks so much for coming on. Everybody who's listening, thank you for listening. I'll put links to everything that Jef just mentioned, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again, Jef.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Chat to you soon.